As the gacha game service continues month after month, year after year, new content gets released and new characters are added to the roster. In order for that new content to be appealing to players, it usually contains a reward or incentive that can improve the player's accounts to be in a better spot than they were in before. For that to happen, said character or reward typically needs to offer more than what the existing roster is able to, or offer the same things at higher margins. That is the fundamental basis of power and feature creep, the inevitable, albeit somewhat necessary process of maintaining player interest by inadvertently rendering old content obsolete in favor of new ones. The archons of Genshin Impact were initially intended to be designed in such a way that their presence in the metagame would remain timeless, just as they themselves are, and for a very long time that's exactly how they ended up. Venti, Zhongli, and Shogun were mainstays in the meta for an extremely long time, and even to this day you can argue the likes of Zhongli and Shogun are still hanging on despite their advanced age. Even so, they're nowhere near as dominant as they used to be, but at the same time you could tell they were at risk of getting power crept eventually. When Nahida came out of version 3 though, I really couldn't fathom for the life of me how anyone could one-up her in strength, but after observing her closely throughout version 4 and 5, Nahida's presence in the metagame has been quietly declining over the past 2 years, where she currently sits at the lowest point she's ever been and is appearing less and less in meta discussions, despite technically still being one of the best characters in the game. In today's episode of What Happened To, I want to talk about the Lesser Lord Kusanali and how exactly she lost her spot without anything really affecting her directly. Before we talk about Nahida though, in case any of you are still trying to get your hands on Skirk, let me bring up our sponsor for today, LD Shop. You may have heard of it before. It's a top-up service that gives you in-game currency at a bargain price, potentially up to 15% off. All you have to do is enter your server and game ID and it will be sent to you within minutes. As you can see on screen, it's a very simple process. Just click on what you want to buy, then put your game ID and server, then wait a few minutes, and there you go. It should arrive without delay. So if you're looking to buy a ton of pulse for Skirk and her weapon, you can use my link and get a 15% and 5% off coupon, which can save you up to 50 bucks. Also, if you haven't yet bought the double up bonus, you will receive it by using LD Shop as well. Those who spend over $80 will also get a VIP membership, which comes with a free Welkin too. Whether you spend only on like Battle Pass and Welkin, or if you drop a couple hundred a month every banner, LD Shop will consistently save you over the long run, so use my link on screen or in the description below to get started on saving. Thanks again to LD Shop for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get back to Nahida. When people think of power creep in Genshin, the first characters that come to mind are usually Furina, Neuvillette, and Mavuika. Units whose apparent power very much outstrips most of the characters in their respective fields, and quite conspicuously too. But for me, I find one of the earliest cases of full-on power creep to be the Dendro Archon. One, because of how it seemed like she was on a completely different standard of power budget than anyone else who came before her, and two, because of how early on in Genshin's history she came out. Jesus Christ, version 3 was back in 2022, what the hell, we're getting old guys. With Dendro being made playable 2 years into Genshin Impact at the start of version 3, the prevailing objective on everyone's mind was to flesh out their accounts with as many Dendro characters as they could get their hands on. The only issue is that up until version 3.2 we had only 3, Tignari, Kole, and DMC. A serviceable starting cast for sure, but it wasn't easy to figure out where Dendro truly stood as an element, seeing as her range of applications was so limited at the time. That was quickly, and almost permanently addressed when Nahida came out. Fittingly, as a Dendro Archon, she handles Dendro better than anyone else in the cast. Part of what lended credence to my earlier statement that she was one of the earliest cases of blatant power creep was how much crap they put in her kit, how generous they were with their numbers, and how many possible contingencies they considered that could negatively affect her consistency. For starters, All Schemes to Know may very well be one of the best skills in the game for what it's trying to do. On a 5 or 6 second cooldown, Nahida can tag up to 8 enemies in a fairly wide radius around her, especially with the whole version. From then on, all you had to do is attack one of the marked enemies to then have Dendro damage applied to all other marked enemies, essentially chain reacting to them. This made pulling off either Bloom or Quicken extremely easy since right after proccing the corresponding element, Nahida would refresh Dendro onto enemies, giving you more than sufficient application for any and every possible Dendro team. Regarding accounting for contingencies, they ensured the mark had an uptime of 25 seconds on targets, one of the longest buff or technically debuff durations, and as a reminder, her skill cooldown was only 5 or 6 seconds. This gave her the ability to apply more Seed of Scandas on any subsequent enemies that joined the fight, such as in wave battles. Whether you were fighting them in tight clusters or spread out, Nahida could handle all of them. As an added bonus, Nahida was one of the first characters in Genshin to have an overworld skill with a different functionality than just less stamina or more materials or discounts given. A lot of people used her skill to snipe ascension materials that were in hard to reach places. They didn't have to do that, but they chose to, which was a nice quality of life. Application wasn't the only thing about Nahida's skill that made it so effective though. It actually dealt very significant damage, having a strong base attack scaling with a hybrid split in Elemental Mastery. Unlike other previous dual ratios like attack and HP or attack and defense, attack and EM were both offensive stats. The latter in particular was not only responsible for empowering Nahida's skill, but also the damage of any elemental reactions that she triggers, compounding into more returns, since putting points into Elemental Mastery in and of itself would increase her DPS even without her skill cyberscaling. Actually, if we were to split hairs, she had triple scaling courtesy of her A4 passive, giving her even more damage to this ability. This made her by far the best off-field Dendro applicator, as unlike Kale and DMC or even Dendro units who came after her, Nahida could very much hit like a truck if you built her enough. Her elemental burst was also built with that in mind. Illusory Heart would project an arena that, when standing inside it, would empower Nahida's skill to be even stronger. People were freaking out when they first saw this ability due to the sheer size of it. I remember there were modders who used a remote camera tool to compare how big it was in relation to other giant elemental burst animations like Zhongli. Hers was easily the biggest in size by a significant margin, but appearances aside, having pyro units in her party made her skill damage even more, Electro made her skill damage even faster, and Hydro made her ultimate duration last longer, having one of the lowest energy costs in the game and a base duration exceeding its cooldown for even more persistent uptime. Powering up Nahida's own damage output would have been good enough, but they decided to give her more supportive utility, supplementing the active character with bonus elemental mastery, making it so Nahida and her teammates would get stronger by building EM, naturally causing Dendro reaction damage, which has the highest EM multipliers in the game, to become the strongest elemental reactions at that time. This is what I meant by power creep. All things considered, Nahida was on the level of version 4 units like Farina and Neuvillette a solid year before those two even came out. She had incredible area coverage, more uptime than you knew what to do with, she did excellent personal damage and could share her elemental mastery with her team, a buffer, sub-DPSer, and duplicator all in one. Though it is attached to a constellation in her base kit, what really cemented Nahida as power creep for me was the C2, making her the first character I believe to quite literally break the rules of the game, allowing non-amplifying reactions to critically strike, and on top of that she could break enemy defense by 30% at a time when 15% was still considered a selling point for units like Lisa. Nahida still holds the record for the highest single defense break out of any character even in the modern day. C2R1 Nahida was an absolute beast of a support, so much so that memes were made about how a literal child was stronger than Shogun and Zhongli, who were two of the most popular characters at the time. It also helped that Dendro was spearheading the elemental reaction meta beginning in version 3 and continuing well into late version 4. Bloom and Quicken easily outperformed the likes of Taser, Freeze, Overload, and whatnot for their sheer base damage, and Nahida could easily drive both of them while working for a wide variety of teammates, a good number of whom were at the apex tiers of Genshin's metagame at the time like Alhaitham and Nilou. Given how strong the element was and how strong Nahida herself was, it was highly unlikely for either of them to fail to withstand the test of time. To an extent, that statement holds true today. By metrics, Dendro is still a very strong element for what it has to offer. Hoyo had to actively buff other reactions to bring them on the same level as it, and without disclosing too much information cause leaks, apparently I heard from this guy who knows this guy who knows this guy who knows this guy that more balancing is taking place in the near future, but I didn't tell you that. Meanwhile, even though we kept getting more Dendro characters, good ones at that, like Alhaitham, Yao Yao, Baitu, Emily, and Kanish, none of them commanded the same attention that Nahida did. She's overall still considered the most flexible Dendro character in the game, and many were convinced the element would keep its seat at the top of the hierarchy for a long while to come. Throughout version 4, Dendro was still very much a relevant force. One might say it got even better thanks to Neuvillette technically being able to interface with it, Farina empowering personal DPS and offering great off-field application for teams like Nilou, Alhaitham, and Cyno, and then later Clorent being a strong aggravate or quick bloom unit. But around this time, more units were entering the spotlight who not only placed more emphasis on personal strength, but also pursued other avenues of augmenting DPS beyond the popular reactions like Bloom and Quicken. For example, Navia went for Crystallize, Chevris went for Overload, Emily went for Burning, which ironically was the only Dendro reaction Nahida didn't really synergize with all that much. Arlecchino, Linny, and Neuvillette also began the trend of big PP damage carries that derived power from their own kits and not necessarily reactions. For those teams, personal buffs like elemental damage boosting or attack steroids could be taken much further than elemental mastery or reaction supplementation. Unfortunately, Hoyo would continue to go down that route. An early addition to the Nanlan roster would be Kanish, a very strong Dendro DPS, but one that had virtually no pragmatic incentive to include Nahida in her team, especially given Nahida's skill doesn't proc on Burning. He instead had a preference for anyone who could add more DPS like Emily, who, while far from being as good as Nahida in application, had the same area coverage and uptime as her but traded support for extreme off-field DPS, making her the better fit for Kanish. This would be the only update Dendro would receive in a long time as well. All throughout version 4, Dendro was kept roughly the same. The elements didn't receive units who could interface with it, but they were always of the companion elements or weren't specifically intended to be played in that way. The only units who did come out for Dendro would end up playing together and not really include Nahida, who primarily specialized in Bloom and Quicken reactions. Those two reactions in particular have basically not received any noteworthy support since version 3. Then of course we know that version 5, Dendro pretty much became an afterthought following Kanish. Not a single unit that came out from 5.1 onwards had any relation to Dendro whatsoever, all while propelling their respective elements to a higher status. For Essa, Yansan and Auroran were big buffs to Electro. Mavuika was the best thing to happen to Pyro since Bennett. Shilonen brought Geo out of insularity. Chaska put more DPS into Animo. Well, I say Animo in heavy air quotes, while Lanyan brought in a shielder who could actually beat Zhongli at his own game. Solali was an improvement to Hydro and Pyro despite being Cryo, and then most recently Skirk and Escoffier put Cryo back on the front page. This entire time, Dendro has not been affected positively by any of the new inclusions to the roster. Granted, they didn't need to. Dendro was so overpowered back in version 3, Hoyo probably focused on the other units on purpose to spread the wealth. But in a sense, you can argue Nahida's position remained stagnant for the past 2 years now. That's not to say she fell off. Her power level is still somewhat in line with modern generation supports like Farina, Shilonen, Zolali, and Escoffier for her own niche. It's just that niche has not been continuously updated over the years, and to make matters worse, Dendro is one of the most insular elements in Genshin Impact. As a comparison, let's take a look at Farina. What enabled her to continue growing in popularity as one of the most desired supports in the game is because, like Nahida, she had a ridiculous power budget and belonged to a very strong element. But unlike Nahida, Farina had so much more that could be tapped into. For example, off-field Hydro application sub-DPS. Compared to Dendro, who can only tap into parties involving Hydro, Electro, and Pyro, Hydro could tap into every single other element in the game, or heck even itself if you go a mono Hydro team. When Milani came out, while there is anti-synergy, you could argue Farina is usable with her. When Chaska came out, Farina could also be a big buff for her. When Mavuika came out, Farina was a strong asset for her. When Varessa came out, Farina could potentially be used with her. When Skirk came out, Farina was a very powerful support with her. Any new DPS unit that comes out can intrinsically make use of Farina because Hydro itself can interact with every element in the game in a non-intrusive way. Secondly, Farina's own niche of being a damage booster for the party allows her to further be an appealing choice to any character for whom you have an incentive to augment their personal damage. Once again, basically every unit who came out since Novalet has good personal DPS and would very much enjoy a 75% boost. As well, now you have a lot of parties with multiple characters outputting good DPS. Take Skirk, she does a lot, but so does her chef Escoffier. That's yet another reason to bring Farina. Additionally, Hydro doesn't only rely on transformative reaction damage, it can interface with Vaporize and Amplifying one, of which Farina is excellent at facilitating. The circumstances basically aligned in the ex-Hydro Archon's favor thanks to her element finding an excuse to be used with anything. By contrast, Nahida's element Dendro, while incredibly powerful, is far less agnostic in splashability. Though she can supplement your team's elemental mastery and even break enemy defense on Z2, it is only best weaponized in the context of Dendro, meaning Dendro has to come first and foremost. However, over the past 2 years, it hasn't. It also doesn't help that Dendro doesn't interface with half of the playable elements, Cryo, Geo, and Animo. Not the highest profile ones mind you, but still a missed opportunity. Even for the elements that can work with Dendro, its reactions are meant to be intentionally specific, as evident by the most recent high-profile Dendro characters, Kanish and Emily, being fully insular characters with arguably the worst party flexibility of any modern-day unit. So despite being a combination of a buffer and off-field sub-DPS just like Farina, the element Nahida represents is far more restrictive in how it can be shared amongst the cast, being the causality behind her circumstantial decline in popularity. For better or worse, of the 6 playable Archons we have so far, Nahida is the one most emblematic of her element. Zhongli is a Geo Archon, but you can very easily call him the Shield Archon. Farina is a Hydro Archon, but you can call her the buffing sub-DPS Archon. Mavuika is a Pyro Archon, but you might as well call her the Hydrogen Bomb Archon. Nahida, though, is Dendro personified. Her very existence, her playstyle, the reasons you want to use her, and her inherent value are inextricably linked to the Dendro element itself, far more than any other Archon we've had before or since. Therefore, whether she has a 10% usage in Spiral Abyss or 100% depends entirely on whether Dendro itself is necessary, and for the past 2 years, we just haven't been explicitly pressured to field Hyper Bloom or Quicken teams. There was a one recent section that wanted Burning and Burgeon, but again, the only ones that benefit from that stipulation are Kanish and Emily, who are Dendro characters yes, but belong to a section of the element that people don't consider to be part of the greater Dendro experience, if that makes sense. All that's to say, Nahida didn't fall off in terms of personal power. She's still far and away the most flexible Dendro character in the game, no question about it. Dendro itself didn't get worse per se, rather everything else got better. It is still a viable strategy courtesy of a strong DPS floor for its parties, but circumstantially the meta shifted away from Hyperbloom and Quicken, choosing to focus not just on different reactions like Overload, Crystallize, Forward Vaporize, Burning, and Freeze, but also different combat styles like punching attacks, mono element teams, or custom elemental bursts. Nahida will still be relevant, but I don't think she'll be as present as she used to be unless Dendro as a whole makes a big return, though I'm pretty sure that won't happen for quite some time. Anyways, let me know your thoughts on Nahida in the comments down below, whether you agree or disagree with my points, but for the time being, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other What Happened To episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.